Suppose I'll let you run back to Robert to tell him how I frightened you. I wonder if he'll care." Jamie pushed his wet hair back with his fingers and wheeled his horse around. When he was beyond the line of swordsmen, he glanced back at his captain. "Traeger, see that no harm comes to Lord Stark." "As you say, my lord." "Still, we wouldn't want him to leave here entirely unchastened, so—" Through the night and the rain he glimpsed the white of Jamie's smile. "Kill his men." "No!" Ned Stark screamed, clawing for his sword. Jamie was already cantering off down the street as he heard Will shout. Men closed from both sides. Ned rode one down, cutting at phantoms in red cloaks who gave way before him. Jory Castle put his heels into his mount and charged. A steel-shod hoof caught a Lannister guardsman in the face with a sickening crunch. A second man reeled away, and for an instant Jory was free. Will cursed as they pulled him off his dying horse, sword slashing in the rain. Ned galloped to him, bringing his longsword down on Traeger's helm. The jolt of impact made him grit his teeth. Traeger stumbled to his knees, his lion crest sheared in half, blood running down his face. Hewitt was hacking at the hands that had seized his bridle when a spear caught him in the belly. Suddenly, Jory was back among them, a red rain flying from his sword. "No!" Ned shouted. "Jory, away!" Ned's horse slipped under him and came crashing down in the mud. There was a moment of blinding pain and the taste of blood in his mouth. He saw them cut the legs from Jory's mount and drag him to the earth, swords rising and failing as they closed in around him. When Ned's horse lurched back to its feet, he tried to rise, only to fall again, choking on his scream. He could see the splintered bone poking through his calf. It was the last thing he saw for a time. The rain came down and down and down. When he opened his eyes again, Lord Eddard Stark was alone with his dead. His horse moved closer, caught the rank scent of blood, and galloped away. Ned began to drag himself through the mud, gritting his teeth at the agony in his leg. It seemed to take years. Faces watched from candlelit windows, and people began to emerge from alleys and doors, but no one moved to help. Littlefinger and the city watch found him there in the street, cradling Jory Castle's body in his arms. Somewhere, the gold cloaks found a litter, but the trip back to the castle was a blur of agony, and Ned lost consciousness more than once. He remembered seeing the Red Keep looming ahead of him in the first grey light of dawn. The rain had darkened the pale pink stone of the massive walls to the color of blood. Then Grandmaster Pycelle was looming over him, holding a cup, whispering, "Drink, my lord, here, the milk of the poppy, for your pain." He remembered swallowing, and Pycelle was telling someone to heat the wine to boiling and fetch him clean silk, and that was the last he knew. Chapter 36. Daenerys. The horse gate of vast Dothrak was made of 2 gigantic bronze stallions, rearing, their hoofs meeting 100 feet above the roadway to form a pointed arch. Dany could not have said why the city needed a gate when it had no walls, and no buildings that she could see. Yet there it stood, immense and beautiful, the great horses framing the distant purple mountain beyond. The bronze stallions threw long shadows across the waving grasses as Khal Drogo led the Khalasar under their hoofs and down the Godsway, his blood riders beside him. Dany followed on her silver, escorted by Ser Jorah Mormont and her brother Viserys, mounted once more. After the day in the grass when she had left him to walk back to the Khalasar, the Dothraki had laughingly called him Khal Rhaimar, the Sorefoot King. Khal Drogo had offered him a place in a cart the next day, and Viserys had accepted. In his stubborn ignorance, he had not even known he was being mocked. The carts were for eunuchs, cripples, women giving birth, the very young and the very old. That won him yet another name, Khal Rhaegar, the Cart King. Her brother had thought it was the Khal's way of apologizing for the wrong Dany had done him. She had begged Ser Jorah not to tell him the truth, lest he be shamed. The knight had replied that a king could well do with a bit of shame, yet he had done as she bid. It had taken much pleading and all the pillow tricks Doreah had taught her before Dany had been able to make Drogo relent and allow Viserys to rejoin them at the head of the column. "Where's the city?" she asked as they passed beneath the bronze arch. There was no buildings to be seen, no people, only the grass and the road, lined with ancient monuments from all the lands the Dothraki had sacked over the centuries. "Ahead," Ser Jorah answered. "Under the mountain." Beyond the Horse Gate, plundered gods and stolen heroes loomed to either side of them. The forgotten deities of dead cities brandished their broken thunderbolts at the sky as Dany rode her silver past their feet. Stone kings looked down on her from their thrones, their faces chipped and stained, even their names lost in the mists of time. Lithe young maidens danced on marble plinths, draped only in flowers, or poured air from shattered jars. Monsters stood in the grass beside the road, black iron dragons with jewels for eyes, roaring griffins, manticores with their barbed tails poised to strike, and other beasts she could not name. Some of the statues were so lovely they took her breath away, others so misshapen and terrible that Dany could scarcely bear to look at them. Those, Ser Jorah said, had likely come from the Shadowlands beyond Asshai. "So many," she said, as her silver stepped slowly onward. "And from so many lands." Viserys was less impressed. "The trash of dead cities," he sneered. He was careful to speak in the common tongue, which few Dothraki could understand, yet even so Dany found herself glancing back at the man of her cause to make certain he had not been overheard. He went on blithely. "All these savages know how to do is steal the things better men have built. And kill." He laughed. "They do know how to kill, otherwise I'd have no use for them at all." "They are my people now," Dany said. "You should not call them savages, brother." "The dragon speaks as he likes," Viserys said, in the common tongue. He glanced over his shoulder at Aegon and Dracarys riding behind him and favored them with a mocking smile. "See, the savages lack the wit to understand the speech of civilized men." A moss-eaten stone monolith loomed over the road, 50 feet tall. Viserys gazed at it with boredom in his eyes. "How long must we linger amidst these ruins before Drogo gives me my army? I grow tired of waiting." "The princess must be presented to the Dosh Khaleen." "The crones, yes," her brother interrupted. "And there's to be some mummish show of a prophecy for the whelp in her belly, you told me. What is that to me? I'm tired of eating horse meat and I'm sick of the stink of these savages." He sniffed at the wide, floppy sleeve of his tunic, where it was his custom to keep a sachet. It could not have helped much. This tunic was filthy. All the silk and heavy wools that Viserys had worn out of Pentos were stained by hard travel and rotted from sweat. Ser Jorah Mormont said, "The Western Market will have food more to your taste, your grace. The traders from the free cities come there to sell their wares. The Khal will honor his promise in his own time." "He had better," Viserys said grimly. "I was promised a crown and I mean to have it. The dragon is not mocked." Spying on an obscene likeness of a woman with 6 breasts and a ferret's head, he rode off to inspect it more closely. Dany was relieved, yet no less anxious. "I pray that my sun and stars will not keep him waiting too long," she told Ser Jorah when her brother was out of earshot. The knight looked after Viserys doubtfully. "Your brother should have bided his time in Pentos. There was no place for him in a khalasar. Illyrio tried to warn him." "He will go as soon as he has his 10,000. My lord husband promised a golden crown." Ser Jorah grunted. "Yes, Khaleesi, but the Dothraki look on these things differently than we do in the West. I have told him as much as Illyrio told him, but your brother does not listen. The horse lords are no traders. Viserys thinks he sold you, and now he wants his price. Yet Khal Drogo would say he had you as a gift. He will give Viserys a gift in return, yes, in his own time. You do not demand a gift, not of a Khal. You do not demand anything of a Khal." "It is not right to make him wait." Dany did not know why she was defending her brother, yet she was. "Viserys says he could sweep the 7 kingdoms with 10,000 Dothraki screamers." Ser Jorah snorted. "Viserys could not sweep a stable with 10,000 brooms." Dany could not pretend to surprise at the disdain in his tone. What if it were not Viserys?" she asked. "If it were someone else who led them, someone stronger? Could the Dothraki truly conquer the 7 kingdoms? Ser Jorah's face grew thoughtful as their horses trod together down the God's Way. "When I first went into exile, I looked at the Dothraki and saw half-naked barbarians as wild as their horses. If you had asked me then, princess, I should have told you that 1,000 good knights would have no trouble putting to fight 100 times as many Dothraki." "What if I asked you now?" "Now," the knight said, "I am less certain. They are better riders than any knight, utterly fearless, and their bows outrange ours. In the 7 kingdoms most archers fight on foot, from behind a shield wall or a barricade of sharpened stakes. The Dothraki fire from horseback, charging or retreating, it makes no matter, they are full as deadly, and there are so many of them, my lady. Your lord husband alone counts 40,000 mounted warriors in his Khalasar. Is that truly so many? Your brother Rhaegar brought as many men to the Trident, Ser Jorah admitted. But of that number no more than 1/10 were knights. The rest were archers, free riders, and foot soldiers armed with spears and pikes. When Rhaegar fell, many threw down their weapons and fled the field. How long do you imagine such a rabble would stand against a charge of 40,000 screamers howling for blood? How well would boiled leather jerkins and mailed shirts protect him when the arrows fell like rain? Not long, she said. Not well. He nodded. Mind you, princess, if the lords of the 7 kingdoms have the wit the gods gave a goose, it will never come to that. The riders have no taste for siegecraft. I doubt they could take even the weakest castle in the 7 kingdoms, but if Robert Baratheon were fool enough to give them battle... Is he? Dany asked. A fool, I mean. Ser Jorah considered that for a moment. Robert should have been born Dothraki, he said at last. Your Khal would tell you that only a coward hides behind stone walls instead of facing his enemy with a blade in hand. The usurper would agree. He's a strong man, brave, and rash enough to meet a Dothraki horde in the open field. But the men around him, well, their pipers play a different tune. His brother Stannis, Lord Tywin Lannister, Eddard Stark. He spat. You hate this Lord Stark, Dany said. He took from me all I loved for the sake of a few lice-ridden poachers and his precious honor, Ser Jorah said bitterly. From his tone, she could tell the loss still pained him. He changed the subject quickly. There, he announced, pointing. Vaz Dothrak, the city of the horse lords. Khal Drogo and his blood riders led them through the great bazaar of the western market, down the broad ways beyond. Dany followed close on her silver, staring at the strangeness about her. Vaz Dothrak was at once the largest city and the smallest that she had ever known. She thought it must be 10 times as large as Pentos, a vastness without walls or limits, its broad windswept streets paved in grass and mud and carpeted with wild flowers. In the free cities of the west, towers and manses and hovels and bridges and shops and halls all crowded in on one another, but Vaz Dothrak sprawled languorously, baking in the warm sun, ancient, arrogant, and empty. Even the buildings were so queer to her eyes. She saw carved stone pavilions, manses of woven grass as large as castles, rickety wooden towers, stepped pyramids faced with marble, log halls open to the sky. In place of walls, some palaces were surrounded by thorny hedges. None of them are alike, she said. Your brother had part of the truth, Ser Jorah admitted. The Dothraki do not build. 1,000 years ago, to make a house, they would dig a hole in the earth and cover it with a woven grass roof. The buildings you see were made by slaves brought here from lands they've plundered, and they built each after the fashion of their own peoples. Most of the halls, even the largest, seemed deserted. Where are the people who live here? Dany asked. The bazaar had been full of running children and men shouting, but elsewhere she had seen only a few eunuchs going about their business. Only the crowns of the Dosh Khaleen dwell permanently in the sacred city, them and their slaves and servants, Ser Jorah replied. Yet Vaz Dothrak is large enough to house every man of every Khalasar, should all the Khals return to the mother at once. The crones have prophesied that one day that will come to pass, and so Vaz Dothrak must be ready to embrace all its children. Khal Drogo finally called a halt near the eastern market, where the caravans from Yi Ti and Asshai and the Shadowlands came to trade, with the Mother of Mountains looming overhead. Dany smiled as she recalled Majesty Illyria's slave girl in her talk of a palace with 200 rooms and doors of solid silver. The palace was a cavernous wooden feasting hall, its rough-hewn timbered walls rising 40 feet, its roof soon silk, a vast billowing tent that could be raised to keep out the rare rains, or lowered to admit the endless sky. Around the hall were broad grassy horseyards, fenced with high hedges, fire pits, and hundreds of round earthen houses that bulged from the ground like miniature hills, covered with grass. A small army of slaves had gone ahead to prepare for Khal Drogo's arrival. As each rider swung down from his saddle, he unbelted his arak and handed it to a waiting slave, and any other weapons he carried as well. Even Khal Drogo himself was not exempt. Ser Jorah had explained that it was forbidden to carry a blade in Vast Dothrak, or to shed a free man's blood. Even warring Khalasars put aside their feuds and shared meat and mead together when they were in sight of the Mother of Mountains. In this place, the crones of the Dosh Khaleen had decreed, all the Thraki were one blood, one Khalasar, one herd. Khal Hollow came to Dany as Irri and Jiki were helping her down of her silver. He was the oldest of Drogo's 3 blood riders, a squat, bald man with a crooked nose and a mouth full of broken teeth, shattered by a mace 20 years before when he saved a young Kalaka from sellswords who hoped to sell him to his father's enemies. His life had been bound to Drogo's the day her lord husband was born. Every Khal had his blood riders. At first, Dany had thought of them as a kind of Dothraki Kingsguard, sworn to protect their lord, but it went further than that. Jiki had taught her that a blood rider was more than a guard. They were the Khal's brothers, his shadows, his fiercest friends. Blood of my blood, Drogo called them, and so it was. They shared a single life. The ancient traditions of the Horse Lords demanded that when the Khal died, his blood riders died with him, to ride at his side in the Night Lands. If the Khal died at the hands of some enemy, they lived only long enough to avenge him, and then followed him joyfully into the grave. In some Khalasars, Jiki said, the blood riders shared the Khal's wine, his tent, and even his wife's, though never his horses. A man's mount was his own. Daenerys was glad that Khal Drogo did not hold to those ancient ways. She should not have liked being shared. And while old Khal Hollow treated her kindly enough, the others frightened her. Haggo, huge and silent, often glowed as if he had forgotten who she was, and Crotto had cruel eyes and quick hands that liked to hurt. He left bruises on Doreah's soft white skin whenever he touched her, and sometimes made Irri sob in the night. Even his horses seemed to fear him. Yet they were bound to Drogo for life and death, so Daenerys had no choice but to accept them. And sometimes she found herself wishing her father had been protected by such men. In the songs, the White Knights of the King's Guard were ever noble, valiant, and true, and yet King Aerys had been murdered by one of them, the handsome boy they now called the Kingslayer, and the second, Sir Barristan the Bold, had gone over to the usurper. She wondered if all men were as false in the 7 kingdoms. When her son sat the Iron Throne, she would see that he had blood riders of his own to protect him against treachery in his Kingsguard. "Khaleesi," Khal Hollow said to her in Dothraki, "Drogo, who is blood of my blood, commands me to tell you that you must ascend the Mother of Mountains this night, to sacrifice to the gods for his safe return." Only men were allowed to set foot on the Mother, Dany knew. The Khal's blood riders would go with him and return at dawn. "Tell my son and stars that I dream of him, and wait anxious for his return," she replied, thankful. Dany tired more easily as the child grew within her. In truth, a night of rest would be most welcome. Her pregnancy only seemed to have inflamed Drogo's desire for her, and of late his embraces left her exhausted. Doreah led her to the hollow hill that had been prepared for her and her Khal. It was cool and dim within, like a tent made of earth. "Jiki, a bath, please," she commanded, to wash the dust of travel from her skin and soak her weary bones. It was pleasant to know that they would linger here for a while, that she would not need to climb back on her silver on the morrow. The water was scalding hot as she liked it. "I will give my brother his gifts tonight," she decided as Jiki was washing her hair. "He should look a king in the sacred city. Doreah, run and find him and invite him to sup with me." Viserys was nicer to the Lysene girl than to her Dothraki handmaids, perhaps because Majesty Illyria had let him bed her back in Pentos. "Irri, go to the bazaar and buy fruit and meat, anything but horseflesh." "Horse is best," Irri said. "Horse makes a man strong." "Viserys hates horse meat." "As you say, Khaleesi." She brought back a haunch of goat and a basket of fruits and vegetables. Jiki roasted the meat with sweetgrass and firepots, basting it with honey as it cooked, and there were melons and pomegranates and plums and some queer Eastern fruit Dany did not know. While her handmaids prepared the meal, Dany laid out the clothing she had made to her brother's measure, a tunic and leggings of crisp white linen, leather sandals that laced up to the knee, a bronze medallion belt, a leather vest painted with fire-breathing dragons. The Dothraki would respect him more if he looked less a beggar, she hoped, and perhaps he would forgive her for shaming him that day in the grass. He was still her king, after all, and her brother. They were both blood of the dragon. She was arranging the last of his gifts, a sand-silk cloak, green as grass, with a pale grey border that would bring out the silver in his hair, when Viserys arrived, dragging Doreah by the arm. Her eye was red where he'd hit her. "How dare you send this whore to give me commands?" he said. He shoved the handmaid roughly to the carpet. The anger took Dany utterly by surprise. "I only wanted... Doreah, what did you say?" "Khaleesi pardons, forgive me. I went to him as you bid and told him you commanded him to join for supper." "No one commands the dragon," Viserys snarled. "I am your king. I should have sent you back her head." The Lysene girl quailed, but Dany calmed her with a touch. "Don't be afraid, he won't hurt you. Sweet brother, please, forgive her. The girl misspoke herself. I told her to ask you to sup with me, if it pleases your grace." She took him by the hand and drew him across the room. "Look, these are for you." Viserys frowned suspiciously. "What is all this?" "New raiment. I had made it for you." Dany smiled shyly. He looked at her and sneered. "Dothraki rags, do you presume to dress me now?" "Please, you'll be cooler and more comfortable, and I thought, maybe if you dressed like them, the Dothraki." Dany did not know how to say it without waking his dragon. "Next you'll want to braid my hair." "I'd never..." Why was he always so cruel? She had only wanted to help. "You have no right to a braid. You have won no victories yet." It was the wrong thing to say. Fury shone from his lilac eyes, yet he dared not strike her, not with her handmaids watching, and the warriors of her cause outside. Viserys picked up the cloak and sniffed at it. "This stinks of manure. Perhaps I shall use it as a horse blanket." "I had Doreah sew it specially for you," she told him, wounded. "These are garments fit for a carl." "I am the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, not some grass-stained savage with bells in his hair." Viserys spat back at her. He grabbed her arm. "You forget yourself, slut. Do you think that big belly will protect you if you wake the dragon?" His fingers dug into her arm painfully, and for an instant Dany felt like a child again, quailing in the face of his rage. She reached out with her other hand and grabbed the first thing she touched, the belt she'd hoped to give him, a heavy chain of ornate bronze medallions. She swung it with all her strength. It caught him full in the face. Viserys let go of her. Blood ran down his cheek where the edge of one of the medallions had sliced it open. "You are the one who forgets himself," Dany said to him. "Didn't you learn anything that day in the grass? Leave me now, before I summon my cast to drag you out. And pray that Khal Drogo does not hear of this, or he will cut open your belly and feed you your own entrails." Viserys scrambled back to his feet. "When I come into my kingdom, you will rue this day, slut." He walked off, holding his torn face, leaving her gifts behind him. Drops of his blood had spattered the beautiful sand-silk cloak. Dany clutched the soft cloth to her cheek and sat cross-legged on her sleeping mats. "Your supper is ready, Khaleesi," Jiki announced. "I'm not hungry," Dany said sadly. She was suddenly very tired. "Share the food among yourselves and send some to Ser Jorah if you would." After a moment she added, "Please, bring me one of the dragon's eggs." Irri fetched the egg with a deep green shell, brass flecks shining amid its scales as she turned it in her small hands. Dany curled up on her side, pulling the sand-silk cloak across her and cradling the egg in the hollow between her swollen belly and small, tender breasts. She liked to hold them. They were so beautiful, and sometimes just being close to them made her feel stronger, braver, as if somehow she were drawing strength from the stone dragons locked inside. She was lying there, holding the egg, when she felt the child move within her, as if he were reaching out, brother to brother, blood to blood. "You are the dragon," Dany whispered to him. "The true dragon. I know it. I know it." And she smiled and went to sleep dreaming of home. Chapter 37. Bran. A light snow was falling. Bran could feel the flakes on his face, melting as they touched his skin like the gentlest of rains. He sat straight atop his horse, watching as the iron-pawed Cullis was winched upward. Try as he might to keep calm, his heart was fluttering in his chest. "Are you ready?" Rob asked. Bran nodded, trying not to let his fears show. He had not been outside Winterfell since his fall, but he was determined to ride out as proud as any knight. "Let's ride then." Rob put his heels into his big grey and white gelding, and the horse walked under the portcullis. "Go," Bran whispered to his own horse. He touched her neck lightly, and the small chestnut filly started forward. Bran had named her Dancer. She was 2 years old, and Joseph said she was smarter than any horse had a right to be. They had trained her special, to respond to rein and voice and touch. Up to now, Bran had only ridden her around the yard. At first, Joseph or Hoder would lead her, while Bran sat strapped to her back in the oversized saddle the imp had drawn up for him, but for the past fortnight he had been riding her on his own, trotting her round and round, and growing bolder with every circuit. They passed beneath the gatehouse, over the drawbridge, through the outer walls. Summer and Grey Wind came loping beside them, sniffing at the wind. Close behind came Theon Greyjoy, with his long bow and a quiver of broadheads. He had a mind to take a deer, he had told them. He was followed by 4 guardsmen in mailed shirts and coifs, and Joseph, a stick-thin stableman whom Rob had named Master of Horse while Hullen was away. Master Luwin brought up the rear, riding on a donkey. Bran would have liked it better if he and Rob had gone off alone, just the 2 of them, but Hal Mollin would not hear of it, and Master Luwin backed him. If Bran fell off his horse or injured himself, the master was determined to be with him. Beyond the castle lay the market square, its wooden stalls deserted now. They rode down the muddy streets of the village, past rows of small neat houses of log and undressed stone. Less than 1 in 5 were occupied, thin tendrils of wood smoke curling up from their chimneys. The rest would fill up one by one as it grew colder. When the snow fell and the ice winds howled down out of the north, Old Nan said, farmers left their frozen fields and distant holdfasts, loaded up their wagons, and then the winter town came alive. Bran had never seen it happen, but Master Luwin said the day was looming closer. The end of the long summer was near at hand. Winter is coming. A few villagers eyed the dire wolves anxiously as the riders went past, and one man dropped the wood he was carrying as he shrank away in fear, but most of the town folk had grown used to the sight. They bent the knee when they saw the boys, and Rob greeted each of them with a lordly nod. With his legs unable to grip, the swaying motion of the horse made Bran feel unsteady at first, but the huge saddle with its thick horn and high back cradled him comfortingly, and the straps around his chest and thighs would not allow him to fall. After a time, the rhythm began to feel almost natural. His anxiety faded, and a tremulous smile crept across his face. 2 serving wenches stood beneath the sign of the Smoking Lock, the local alehouse. When Theon Greyjoy called out to them, the younger girl turned red and covered her face. Theon spurred his mount to move up beside Rob. "Sweet Kira," he said with a laugh. "She squirms like a weasel in bed, but say a word to her on the street, and she blushes pink as a maid. Did I ever tell you about the night that she and Bessa—" "Not where my brother can hear, Theon," Rob warned him with a glance at Bran. Bran looked away and pretended not to have heard, but he could feel Greyjoy's eyes on him. No doubt he was smiling. He smiled a lot, as if the world were a secret joke that only he was clever enough to understand. Rob seemed to admire Theon and enjoy his company, but Bran had never warmed to his father's ward. Rob rode closer. "You're doing well, Bran." "I want to go faster," Bran replied. Rob smiled. "As you will." He sent his gelding into a trot. The wolves raced after him. Bran snapped the reins sharply, and Dancer picked up her pace. He heard a shout from Theon Greyjoy and the hoofbeats of the other horses behind him. Bran's cloak billowed out, rippling in the wind, and the snow seemed to rush at his face. Rob was well ahead, glancing back over his shoulder from time to make sure Bran and the others were following. He snapped the reins again. Smooth as silk, Dancer slid into a gallop. The distance closed. By the time he caught Rob on the edge of the Wolfswood, 2 miles beyond the winter town, they had left the others well behind. "I can ride!" Bran shouted, grinning. It felt almost as good as flying. "I'd race you, but I fear you'd win." Rob's tone was light and joking, yet Bran could tell that something was troubling his brother underneath the smile. "I don't want to race." Bran looked around for the dire wolves. Both had vanished into the wood. "Did you hear Summer howling last night?" "Grey Wind was restless too," Rob said. His auburn hair had grown shaggy and unkempt, and a reddish stubble covered his jaw, making him look older than his 15 years.
"Sometimes I think they know things, sense things."
Rob sighed.
"I never know how much to tell you, Bran. I wish you were older."
"I'm 8 now," Bran said. 8 isn't so much younger than 15, and I'm the heir to Winterfell after you."
"So you are."
Rob sounded sad and even a little scared.
"Bran, I need to tell you something. There was a bird last night, from King's Landing. Master Luwin woke me."
Bran felt a sudden dread. Dark wings, dark words, old Nan always said, and of late the messenger ravens had been proving the truth of the proverb. When Rob wrote to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, the bird that came back brought word that Uncle Benjen was still missing. Then, a message had arrived from the Eyrie, from Mother, but that had not been good news either. She did not say when she meant to return, only that she had taken the imp as prisoner. Bran had sort of liked the little man, yet the name Lannister sent cold fingers creeping up his spine. There was something about the Lannisters, something he ought to remember, but when he tried to think what, he felt dizzy and his stomach clenched hard as a stone. Rob spent most of that day locked behind closed doors with Master Luwin, Theon Greyjoy, and Hallis Mollin. Afterward, riders were sent out on fast horses, carrying Rob's commands throughout the north. Bran heard talk of Moat Cailin, the ancient stronghold the first man had built atop of the Neck. No one ever told him what was happening, yet he knew it was not good. And now another raven, another message. Bran clung to hope. "Was the bird from Mother? Is she coming home?"
"The message was from Aelian in the King's Landing. Jory Castle is dead, and Will and Heward as well, murdered by the Kingslayer."
Rob lifted his face to the snow, and the flakes melted on his cheeks.
"May the gods give them rest."
Bran did not know what to say. He felt as if he'd been punched. Jory had been captain of the household guard at Winterfell since before Bran was born. They killed Jory? He remembered all the times Jory had chased him over the roofs. He could picture him striding across the yard in mail and plate, or sitting at his accustomed place in a bench in the great hall, joking as he ate. Why would anyone kill Jory? Rob shook his head numbly, the pain plain in his eyes.
"I don't know, and Bran, that's not the worst of it. Father was caught beneath a falling horse in the fight. Ellen says his leg was shattered and Master Pycelle has given him the milk of the poppy, but they aren't sure when he..." The sound of hoofbeats made him glance down the road to where Theon and the others were coming up. "When he will wake," Rob finished. He laid his hand on the pommel of his sword then, and went on in the solemn voice of Rob the Lord. "Bran, I promise you, whatever might happen, I will not let this be forgotten." Something in his tone made Bran even more fearful. "What will you do?" he asked as Theon Greyjoy reined in beside him. "Theon thinks I should call the banners," Rob said. "Blood for blood."
For once Greyjoy did not smile. His lean dark face had a hungry look to it, and black hair fell down across his eyes. "Only the Lord can call the banners," Bran said as the snow drifted down around him.
"If your father dies," Theon said, "Rob will be Lord of Winterfell."
"He won't die!" Bran screamed at him. Rob took his hand.
"He won't die, not father," he said calmly. "Still, the honor of the North is in my hands now. When our Lord Father took his leave of us, he told me to be strong for you and for Rickon. I'm almost a man grown, Bran."
Bran shivered. "I wish Mother was back," he said miserably. He looked around for Master Luwin. His donkey was visible in the far distance, trotting over a rise. "Does Master Luwin say to call the banners too?"
"The master is timid as an old woman," said Theon.
"Father always listened to his counsel," Bran reminded his brother. "Mother too."
"I listen to him," Rob insisted. "I listen to everyone."
The joy Bran had felt at the ride was gone, melted away like the snowflakes on his face. Not so long ago, the thought of Rob calling the banners and riding off to war would have filled him with excitement, but now he felt only dread. "Can we go back now?" he asked. "I'm cold." Rob glanced around.
"We need to find the wolves. Can you stand to go a bit longer?"
"I can go as long as you can." Master Luwin had warned him to keep the ride short, for fear of saddle sores, but Bran would not admit to weakness in front of his brother. He was sick of the way everyone was always fussing over him and asking how he was.
Let's hunt down the hunters then, Robb said. Side by side they urged their mounts off the King's Road and struck out into the Wolfswood. Theon dropped back and followed well behind them, talking and joking with the guardsmen. It was nice under the trees. Bran kept Dancer to a walk, holding the reins lightly and looking all around him as they went. He knew this wood, but he had been so long confined to Winterfell that he felt as though he were seeing it for the first time. The smells filled his nostrils, the sharp fresh tang of pine needles, the earthy odour of wet rotting leaves, the hints of animal musk and distant cooking fires. He caught a glimpse of a black squirrel moving through the snow-covered branches of an oak, and paused to study the silvery web of an empress spider. Theon and the others fell farther and farther behind, until Bran could no longer hear their voices. From ahead came the faint sound of rushing waters. It grew louder until they reached the stream. Tears stung his eyes. "Bran," Robb asked, "what's wrong?" Bran shook his head. "I was just remembering," he said. "Jory brought us here once, to fish for trout. You and me and Jon. Do you remember?" "I remember," Robb said, his voice quiet and sad. "I didn't catch anything," Bran said, "but Jon gave me his fish on the way back to Winterfell. Will we ever see Jon again?" "We saw Uncle Benjen when the king came to visit," Robb pointed out. "Jon will visit too, you'll see." The stream was running high and fast. Robb dismounted and led his gelding across the ford. In the deepest part of the crossing, the water came up to mid-thigh. He tied his horse to a tree on the far side and waded back across for Bran and Dancer. The current foamed around rock and root, and Bran could feel the spray on his face as Robb led him over. It made him smile. For a moment he felt strong again, and whole. He looked up at the trees and dreamed of climbing them, right up to the very top, with the whole forest spread out beneath him. They were on the far side when they heard the howl, a long rising wail that moved through the trees like a cold wind. Bran raised his head to listen. "Summer," he said. No sooner had he spoken than a second voice joined the first. "They've made a kill," Robb said as he remounted. "I'd best go and bring them back. Wait here. Theon and the others should be along shortly." "I want to go with you," Bran said. "I'll find them faster by myself." Robb spurred his gelding and vanished into the trees. Once he was gone, the woods seemed to close in around Bran. The snow was falling more heavily now. Where it touched the ground it melted, but all about him rock and root and branch wore a thin blanket of white. As he waited, he was conscious of how uncomfortable he felt. He could not feel his legs, hanging useless in the stirrups, but the strap around his chest was tight and chafing, and the melting snow had soaked through his gloves to chill his hands. He wondered what was keeping Theon and Marsaloon and Jarzeth and the rest. When he heard the rustle of leaves, Bran used the reins to make Dancer turn, expecting to see his friends, but the wrecked men who stepped out onto the bank of the stream were strangers. "Good day to you," he said nervously. One look and Bran knew they were neither foresters nor farmers. He was suddenly conscious of how richly he was dressed. His surcoat was new, dark grey wool with silver buttons, and a heavy silver pin fastened his fur-trimmed cloak at the shoulders. His boots and gloves were lined with fur as well. "All alone, are you?" said the biggest of them, a bald man with a raw wind-burnt face. "Lost in the Wolf's Wood, poor lad." "I'm not lost." Bran did not like the way the strangers were looking at him. He counted 4, but when he turned his head, he saw 2 others behind him. "My brother rode off just a moment ago, and my guard will be here shortly." "Your guard, is it?" a second man said. Grey stubble covered his gaunt face. "And what would they be guarding, my little lord? Is that a silver pin I see there on your cloak?" "Pretty," said a woman's voice. She scarcely looked like a woman. Tall and lean, with the same hard face as the others, her hair hidden beneath a bowl-shaped half-helm. The spear she held was 8 feet of black oak, tipped in rusted steel. "Let's have a look," said the big, bald man. Bran watched him anxiously. The man's clothes were filthy, fallen almost to pieces, patched here with brown and here with blue, and there with a dark green, and faded everywhere to grey, but once that cloak might have been black. The grey stubbly man wore black rags too, he saw with a sudden start. Suddenly, Bran remembered the oathbreaker his father had beheaded, the day they had found the wolf pups. That man had worn black as well, and father said he had been a deserter from the Night's Watch. "No man is more dangerous," he remembered Lord Eddard saying. The deserter knows his life is forfeit if he is taken, so he will not flinch from any crime, no matter how vile or cruel. "The pin, lad," the big man said. He held out his hand. "We'll take the horse too," said another of them, a woman shorter than Rob, with a broad-fired face and lank yellow hair. "Get down and be quick about it." A knife slid from her sleeve into her hand, its edge jagged as a saw. "No," Bran blurted. "I can't." The big man grabbed his reins before Bran could think to wheel Dancer around and gallop off. "You can, lordling, and will, if you know what's good for you."
"Stiff, look how he's strapped on." The tall woman pointed with her spear. "Might be it's the truth he's telling."
"Straps, is it?" Stiff said. He drew a dagger from a sheath at his belt. "There's a way to deal with straps."
"You some kind of cripple?" asked the short woman. Bran flared. "I'm Brandon Stark of Winterfell, and you better let go of my horse or I'll see you all dead." The gaunt man with the grey stubbled face laughed.
"The boy's a Stark, true enough. Only a Stark would be fool enough to threaten where smarter men would beg."
"Cut his little cock off and stuff it in his mouth," suggested the short woman. "That should shut him up." "You're as stupid as you're ugly, Hallie," said the tall woman. "The boy's worth nothing dead, but alive. Gods be damned, think what Mance would give to have Benjen Stark's own blood to hostage."
"Mance be damned," the big man cursed. "You want to go back there, Osha? More fool you. Think the White Walkers will care if you have a hostage?" He turned back to Bran and slashed at the strap around his thigh. The leather parted with a sigh. The stroke had been quick and careless, biting deep. Looking down, Bran glimpsed pale flesh where the wool of his leggings had parted. Then the blood began to flow. He watched the red stain spread, feeling light-headed, curiously apart. There had been no pain, not even a hint of feeling. The big man grunted in surprise. "Put down your steel now, and I promise you shall have a quick and painless death," Rob called out. Bran looked up in desperate hope, and there he was. The strength of the words were undercut by the way his voice cracked with strain. He was mounted, the bloody carcass of an elk slung across the back of his horse, his sword in gloved hand. "The brother," said the man with the grey stubbly face. "He's a fierce one, is he?" mocked the short woman. Hallie, they called her. "You mean to fight us, boy?" "Don't be a fool, lad. You're 1 against 6. The tall woman, Osha, levelled her spear. "Off the horse and throw down the sword. We'll thank you kindly for the mount and for the venison, and you and your brother can be on your way." Rob whistled. They heard the faint sound of soft feet on wet leaves. The undergrowth parted, low-hanging branches giving up their accumulation of snow, and Greywind and Summer emerged from the green. Summer sniffed the air and growled. "Wolves!" gasped Hallie. "Dire wolves," Bran said. Still half-grown, they were as large as any wolf he had ever seen, but the differences were easy to spot if you knew what to look for. Master Luwin and Farlin the Kennel Master had taught him. A dire wolf had a bigger head and longer legs in proportion to its body, and its snout and jaw were markedly leaner and more pronounced. There was something gaunt and terrible about them as they stood there amid the gently falling snow. Fresh blood spotted Greywind's muzzle. "Dogs," the big bald man said contemptuously. "Yet I'm told there's nothing like a wolfskin cloak to warm a man by night." He made a sharp gesture. "Take them!" Rob shouted, "Winterfell!" and kicked his horse. The gelding plunged down the bank as the ragged man closed. A man with an axe rushed in, shouting and heedless. Rob's sword caught him full in the face with a sickening crunch and a spray of bright blood. The man with the gaunt, stubbly face made a grab for the reins, and for half a second he had them. And then Greywind was on him, bearing him down. He fell back into the stream with a splash and a shout, flailing wildly with his knife as his head went under. The dire wolf plunged in after him, and the white water turned red where they had vanished. Rob and Osha matched blows in midstream. Her long spear was a steel-headed serpent, flashing out at his chest, once, twice, 3 times. But Rob parried every thrust with his long sword, turning the point aside. On the 4th or 5th thrust, the tall woman overextended herself and lost her balance, just for a second. Rob charged, riding her down. A few feet away, Summer darted in and snapped at Hallie. The knife bit at his flank. Summer slid away, snarling, and came rushing in again. This time his jaws closed around her calf. Holding the knife with both hands, the small woman stabbed down, but the dire wolf seemed to sense the blade coming. He pulled free for an instant, his mouth full of leather and cloth and bloody flesh. When Hallie stumbled and fell, he came at her again, slamming her backward, teeth tearing at her belly. The sixth man ran from the carnage, but not far. As he went scrambling up the far side of the bank, Grey Wind emerged from the stream, dripping wet. He shook the water off and bounded after the running man, hamstringing him with a single snap of his teeth, and going for the throat as the screaming man slid back down toward the water. And then there was no one left but the big man, Stiv. He slashed at Bran's chest strap, grabbed his arm, and yanked. Suddenly Bran was falling. He sprawled on the ground, his legs tangled under him, one foot in the stream. He could not feel the cold of the water, but he felt the steel when Stiv pressed his dagger to his throat. "Back away," the man warned, "or I'll open the boy's windpipe, I swear it." Robb reined his horse in, breathing hard. The fury went out of his eyes, and his sword arm dropped. In that moment Bran saw everything. Summer was savaging Hallie, pulling glistening blue snakes from her belly. Her eyes were wide and staring. Bran could not tell whether she was alive or dead. The grey stubbly man and the one with the axe lay unmoving, but Osha was on her knees, crawling toward her fallen spear. Grey Wind padded toward her, dripping wet. "Call him off," the big man shouted. "Call them both off or the cripple boy dies now." "Grey Wind, Summer, to me," Robb said. The dire wolves stopped, turned their heads. Grey Wind loped back to Robb. Summer stayed where he was, his eyes on Bran and the man beside him. He growled. His muzzle was wet and red, but his eyes burned. Osha used the butt end of her spear to lever herself back to her feet. Blood leaked from a wound on the upper arm where Robb had cut her. Bran could see sweat trickling down the big man's face. Stiv was as scared as he was, he realized. "Starks," the man muttered. "Bloody Starks." He raised his voice. "Osha, kill the wolves and get his sword." "Kill them yourself," she replied. "I'll not be getting near those monsters." For a moment Stiv was at a loss. His hand trembled. Bran felt a trickle of blood where the knife pressed against his neck. The stench of the man filled his nose. He smelled of fear. "You," he called out to Robb. "You have a name?" "I'm Robb Stark, the heir to Winterfell." "This is your brother?" "Yes." "You want him alive? You do what I say. Off the horse." Robb hesitated a moment. Then, slowly and deliberately, he dismounted and stood with his sword in hand. "Now, kill the wolves." Robb did not move. "You do it! The wolves or the boy?" "No!" Bran screamed. If Robb did as they asked, Stiv would kill them both anyway once the direwolves were dead. The bald man took hold of his hair with his free hand and twisted it cruelly, till Bran sobbed in pain. "You shut your mouth, cripple, you hear me?" He twisted harder. "You hear me?" A low thrum came from the woods behind them. Stiv gave a choked gasp as a half-foot of razor-tipped broadhead suddenly exploded out of his chest. The arrow was bright red, as if it had been painted in blood. The dagger fell away from Bran's throat. The big man swayed and collapsed, face down in the stream. The arrow broke beneath him. Bran watched his life go swirling off in the water. Osha glanced around as father's guardsman appeared from beneath the trees, steel in hand. She threw down her spear. "Mercy, my lord," she called to Robb. The guardsmen had a strange, pale look to their faces as they took in the scene of slaughter. They eyed the wolves uncertainly, and when Summer returned to Hallie's corpse to feed, Joseph dropped his knife and scrambled for the bush, heaving. Even Master Luwin seemed shocked as he stepped from behind a tree, but only for an instant. Then he shook his head and waded across the stream to Bran's side. "Are you hurt?" "He cut my leg," Bran said, "but I couldn't feel it." As the master knelt to examine the wound, Bran turned his head. Theon Greyjoy stood beside a sentinel tree, his bow in hand. He was smiling, ever smiling. 6 arrows were thrust into the soft ground at his feet, but it had taken only one. "A dead enemy is a thing of beauty," he announced. "Jon always said you were an ass, Greyjoy," Robb said loudly. "I ought to chain you up in the yard and let Bran take a few practice shots at you. You should be thanking me for saving your brother's life." "What if you had missed the shot?" Robb said. What if you'd only wounded him? What if you had made his hand jump or hit Bran instead? For all you knew, the man might have been wearing a breastplate. All you could see was the back of his cloak. What would have happened to my brother then? Did you ever think of that, Greyjoy?
Theon's smile was gone. He gave a sullen shrug and began to pull his arrows from the ground, one by one. Robb glared at his guardsmen.
Where were you?
He demanded of them.
I was sure you were close behind us.
The men traded unhappy glances. We were following, my lord, said Quent, the youngest of them, his beard a soft brown fuzz. Only first we waited for Master Luwin and his ass, begging your pardons, and then, well, as it were... He glanced over at Theon and quickly looked away, abashed.
I spied a turkey,
Theon said, annoyed by the question.
How was I to know that you'd leave the boy alone?
Robb turned his head to look at Theon once more. Bran had never seen him so angry, yet he said nothing. Finally he knelt beside Master Luwin.
How badly is my brother wounded?
No more than a scratch, the master said. He wet a cloth in the stream to clean the cut.
2 of them wear the black, he told Robb as he worked.
Robb glanced over at where Stiff lay sprawled in the stream, his ragged black cloak moving fitfully as the rushing waters tugged at it.
Deserters from the Night's Watch, he said grimly. They must have been fools to come so close to Winterfell.
Folly and desperation are ofttimes hard to tell apart, said Master Luwin.
Shall we bury them, my lord? Asked Quent. They would not have buried us, Robb said. Hack off their heads. We'll send them back to the wall. Leave the rest for the carrion crows.
And this one? Quent jerked a thumb toward Osha. Robb walked over to her. She was a head taller than he was, but she dropped to her knees at his approach. Give me my life, my Lord of Stark, and I'm yours.
Mine? What would I do with an oath breaker?
I broke no oaths. Stiff and Wallen flew down off the wall, not me. The Black Crow's got no place for women. Theon Greyjoy sauntered closer.
Give her to the wolves, he urged Robb.
The woman's eyes went to what was left of Hallie, and just as quickly away. She shuddered. Even the guardsmen looked queasy.
She's a woman, Robb said.
A wildling, Bran told him. She said they should keep me alive so they could take me to Mance Rayder.
Do you have a name? Robb asked her.
Osha, as it pleased the Lord, she muttered sourly. Master Luwin stood.
We might do well question her.
Bran could see the relief on his brother's face.
As you say, Master. Wayne, bind her hands. She'll come back to Winterfell with us, and live or die by the truth she gives us.
Chapter 38. Tyrion.
You won't eat?
Mord asked, glowering. He had a plate of oiled beans in one thick, stub-fingered hand. Tyrion Lannister was starved, but he refused to let this brute see him cringe.
A leg of lamb would be pleasant, he said,
from the heap of soiled straw in the corner of his cell.
Perhaps a dish of peas and onions, some fresh baked bread with butter, and a flagon of mulled wine to wash it down. Or beer, if that's easier. I try not to be overly particular. His beans, Mort said. Here.
He held out the plate. Tyrion sighed. The turnkey was 20 stone of gross stupidity, with brown rotting teeth and small dark eyes. The left side of his face was slick with scar, where an axe had cut off his ear and part of his cheek. He was as predictable as he was ugly, but Tyrion was hungry. He reached up for the plate. Mord jerked it away, grinning.
"Is here,"
he said, holding out beyond Tyrion's reach. The dwarf climbed stiffly to his feet, every joint aching.
"Must we play the same fool's game with every meal?"
He made another grab for the beans. Mord shambled backward, grinning through his rotten teeth.
"Is he a dwarf, man?"
He held the plate out at arm's length, over the edge where the cell ended and the sky began.
"You want not eat? Here, come take."
Tyrion's arms were too short to reach the plate, and he was not about to step that close to the edge. All it would take would be a quick shove of Mord's heavy white belly, and he would end up a sickening red splotch on the stones of Skye, like so many other prisoners of the Eyrie over the centuries.
"Come to think on it, I'm not hungry after all," he declared,
retreating to the corner of his cell. Mord grunted and opened his thick fingers. The wind took the plate, flipping it over as it fell. A handful of beans sprayed back at them as the food tumbled out of sight.
The turnkey laughed, his gut shaking like a bowl of pudding. Tyrion felt a pang of rage. "You fucking son of a pox-ridden ass," he spat. "I hope you die of a bloody flux." For that, Mort gave him a kick, driving a steel-toed boot hard into Tyrion's ribs on the way out. "I take it back," he gasped as he doubled over on the straw. "I'll kill you myself, I swear it." The heavy iron-bound door slammed shut. Tyrion heard the rattle of keys. For a small man, he had been cursed with a dangerously big mouth, he reflected as he crawled back to his corner of what the Arryns laughably called their dungeon. He huddled beneath the thin blanket that was his only bedding, staring out at a blaze of empty blue sky and distant mountains that seemed to go on forever, wishing he still had the shadow-skin cloak he'd won from Marillion at dice after the singer had stolen it off the body of that brigand chief. The skin had smelled of blood and mold, but it was warm and thick. Mort had taken it the moment he laid eyes on it. The wind tugged at his blanket with gusts sharp as talons. His cell was miserably small, even for a dwarf. Not 5 feet away, where a wall ought to have been, where a wall would be in proper dungeon, the floor ended and the sky began. He had plenty of fresh air and sunshine, and the moon and stars by night, but Tyrion would have traded it all in an instant for the dankest, gloomiest pit in the bowels of the Casterly Rock. "You fly," Mort had promised him when he'd shoved him into the cell. 20 days, 30, 50 maybe, then you fly. The Arryns kept the only dungeon in the realm where the prisoners were welcome to escape at will. That first day, after girding up his courage for hours, Tyrion had lain flat on his stomach and squirmed to the edge to poke out his head and look down. Sky was 600 feet below, with nothing between but empty air. If he craned his neck out as far as it could go, he could see other cells to his right and left and above him. He was a bee in a stone honeycomb, and someone had torn off his wings. It was cold in his cell, the wind screamed night and day, and worst of all, the floor sloped. Ever so slightly, yet it was enough. He was afraid to close his eyes, afraid that he might roll over in his sleep and wake in sudden terror as he went sliding off the edge. Small wonder the sky cells drove man mad. "God save me," some previous tenant had written on the wall in something that looked suspiciously like blood, "The blue is calling." At first Tyrion wondered who he'd been, and what had become of him. Later, he decided that he would rather not know. If only he had shut his mouth. The wretched boy had started it, looking down on him from a throne of carved weirwood beneath the moon and falcon banners of House Arryn. Tyrion Lannister had been looked down on all his life, but seldom by roomy-eyed 6-year-olds who needed to stuff fat cushions under their cheeks to lift them to the height of a man. "Is he the Batman?" the boy had asked, clutching his doll. "He is," the Lady Lisa had said from the lesser throne beside him. She was all in blue, powdered and perfumed for the suitors who filled her court. "He's so small," the Lord of the Eyrie said, giggling. "This is Tyrion the Imp of House Lannister, who murdered your father." She raised her voice so it carried down the length of high hall of the Eyrie, ringing off the milk-white walls and the slender pillars, so every man could hear it. "He slew the Hand of the King." "Oh, did I kill him too?" Tyrion had said, like a fool. That would have been a very good time to have kept his mouth closed and his head bowed. He could see that now. 7 hells, he had seen it then. The high hall of the Arryns was long and austere, with a forbidding coldness to its walls of blue-veined white marble, but the faces around him had been colder by far. The power of Casterly Rock was far away, and there were no friends of the Lannisters in the Vale of Arryn. Submission and silence would have been his best defences. But Tyrion's mood had been too foul for sense. To his shame, he had faltered during the last leg of their day-long climb up to the Eyrie, his stunted legs unable to take him any higher. Bronn had carried him the rest of the way, and the humiliation poured oil on the flames of his anger. "It would seem I've been a busy little fellow," he said with bitter sarcasm. "I wonder when I found the time to do all this slaying and murdering." He ought to have remembered who he was dealing with. Lisa Arryn and her half-sane weakling son had not been known at court for their love of wit, especially when it was directed at them. "Imp," Lisa said coldly, "you will guard that mocking tongue of yours and speak to my son politely, or I promise you will have cause to regret it."
Remember where you are. This is the Eyrie, and these are knights of the Vale you see around you, true men who love Jon Arryn well. Every one of them would die for me."
"Lady Arryn, should any harm come to me, my brother Jaime will be pleased to see that they do."
Even as he spat out the words, Tyrion knew they were folly. "Can you fly, my lord of Lannister?" Lady Lysa asked. "Does a dwarf have wings? If not, you would be wiser to swallow the next threat that comes to mind."
"I made no threats," Tyrion said. "That was a promise."
Little Lord Robert hopped to his feet at that, so upset he dropped his doll. "You can't hurt us," he screamed. "No one can hurt us here. Tell him, Mother. Tell him he can't hurt us here." The boy began to twitch. "The Eyrie is impregnable," Lysa Arryn declared calmly. She drew her son close, holding him safe in the circle of her plump white arms. "The imp is trying to frighten us, sweet baby. The Lannisters are all liars. No one will hurt my sweet boy."
The hell of it was, she was no doubt right. Having seen what it took to get here, Tyrion could well imagine how it would be for a knight trying to fight his way up in armor, while stones and arrows poured down from above, and enemies contested with him for every step. Nightmare did not begin to describe it. Small wonder the Eyrie had never been taken. Still, Tyrion had been unable to silence himself. "Not impregnable," he said. "Merely inconvenient."
Young Robert pointed down, his hand trembling. "You're a liar. Mother, I want to see him fly." Two guardsmen in sky-blue cloaks seized Tyrion by the arms, lifting him off his floor. The gods only know what might have happened then were it not for Catelyn Stark. "Sister," she called out from where she stood below the thrones, "I beg you to remember, this man is my prisoner. I will not have him harmed." Lysa Arryn glanced at her sister coolly for a moment, then rose and swept down on Tyrion, her long skirts trailing after her. For an instant he feared she would strike him, but instead she commanded them to release him. Her man shoved him to the floor, his legs went out from under him, and Tyrion fell. He must have made quite a sight as he struggled to his knees, only to feel his right leg spasm, sending him sprawling once more. Laughter boomed up and down the high hall of the Arryns. "My sister's little guest is too weary to stand," Lady Lysa announced. "Sir Vardis, take him down to the dungeon. A rest in one of our sky cells will do him much good." The guardsman jerked him upright. Tyrion Lannister dangled between them, kicking feebly, his face red with shame. "I will remember this," he told them all as they carried him off. And so he did, for all the good it did him. At first he had consoled himself that this imprisonment could not last long. Lysa Arryn wanted to humble him, that was all. She would send for him again, and soon. If not her, then Catelyn Stark would want to question him. This time he would guard his tongue more closely. They dare not kill him out of hand. He was still a Lannister of Casterly Rock, and if they shed his blood, it would mean war. Or so he had told himself. Now he was not so certain. Perhaps his captors only meant to let him rot here, but he feared he did not have the strength to rot for long. He was growing weaker every day, and it was only a matter of time until Mort's kicks and blows did him serious harm, provided the Gauler did not starve him to death first. A few more nights of cold and hunger, and the blue would start calling to him too. He wondered what was happening beyond the walls, such as they were, of his cell. Lord Tywin would surely have sent out riders when the word reached him. Jaime might be leading a host through the mountains of the moon even now, unless he was riding north against Winterfell instead. Did anyone outside the Vale even suspect where Catelyn Stark had taken him? He wondered what Cersei would do when she heard. The king could order him freed, but would Robert listen to his queen or his hand? Tyrion had no illusions about the king's love for his sister. If Cersei kept her wits about her, she would insist the king sit in judgment of Tyrion himself. Even Ned Stark could scarcely object to that, not without impugning the honor of the king. And Tyrion would be only too glad to take his chances in a trial. Whatever murders they might lay at his door, the Starks had no proof of anything so far as he could see. Let them make their case before the Iron Throne and the lords of the land. It would be the end of them. If only Cersei were clever enough to see that. Tyrion Lannister sighed. His sister was not without a certain low cunning, but her pride blinded her. She would see the insult in this, not the opportunity. And Jaime was even worse, rash and headstrong and quick to anger. His brother never untied a knot when he could slash it in two with his sword. He wondered which of them had sent the footpad to silence the Stark boy, and whether they had truly conspired at the death of Lord Arryn. If the old hand had been murdered, it was deftly and subtly done. Men of his age died of sudden illness all the time. In contrast, sending some oaf with a stolen knife after Brennan Stark struck him as unbelievably clumsy. And wasn't that peculiar, come to think on it. Tyrion shivered. Now there was a nasty suspicion. Perhaps the dire wolf and the lion were not the only beasts in the woods. And if that was true, someone was using him as a cat's paw. Tyrion Lannister hated being used. He would have to get out of here, and soon. His chances of overpowering Mord were small to none, and no one was about to smuggle him a 600-foot-long rope, so he would have to talk himself free. His mouth had got him into this cell. It could damn well get him out. Tyrion pushed himself to his feet, doing his best to ignore the slope of the floor beneath him with its ever so subtle tug toward the edge. He hammered on the door with a fist. "Mord!" he shouted. "Turnkey! Mord, I want you!" He had to keep it up a good 10 minutes before he heard footsteps. Tyrion stepped back an instant before the door opened with a crash. "Making noise," Mord growled, with blood in his eyes. Dangling from one meaty hand was a leather strap, wide and thick, doubled over in his fist. "Never show them you're afraid," Tyrion reminded himself. "How would you like to be rich?" he asked. Mord hit him. He swung the strap backhand, lazily, but the leather caught Tyrion high on the arm. The force of it staggered him, and the pain made him grit his teeth. "No mouth, dwarf man," Mord warned him. "Gold," Tyrion said, miming a smile. "Casterly Rock is full of gold. Ah!" This time the blow was a forehand, and Mord put more of his arm into the swing, making the leather crack and jump. It caught Tyrion in the ribs and dropped him to his knees, whimpering. He forced himself to look up at the gaoler. "As rich as the Lannisters," he wheezed. "That's what they say, Mord." Mord grunted. The strap whistled through the air and smashed Tyrion full in the face. The pain was so bad he did not remember falling, but when he opened his eyes again he was on the floor of his cell. His ear was ringing, and his mouth was full of blood. He groped for purchase, to push himself up, and his fingers brushed against nothing. Tyrion snatched his hand back as fast as if it had been scaled, and tried his best to stop breathing. He had fallen right on the edge, inches from the blue. "More to say?" Mord held the strap between his fists and gave it a sharp pull. The snap made Tyrion jump. The turnkey laughed. "He won't push me over," Tyrion told himself desperately as he crawled away from the edge. "Catelyn Stark wants me alive. He doesn't dare kill me." He wiped the blood off his lips with the back of his hand, grinned, and said, "That was a stiff one, Mord." The gaoler squinted at him, trying to decide if he was being mocked. "I could make good use of a strong man like you." The strap flew at him, but this time Tyrion was able to cringe away from it. He took a glancing blow to the shoulder, nothing more. "Gold," he repeated, scrambling backward like a crab. "More gold than you'll see here in a lifetime. Enough to buy land, women, horses. You could be a lord. Lord Mord." Tyrion hawked up a glob of blood and phlegm and spat it out into the sky. "Is no gold," Mord said. "He's listening," Tyrion thought. "They relieved me of my purse when they captured me, but the gold is still mine. Catelyn Stark might take a man prisoner, but she'd never stoop to rob him. That wouldn't be honorable. Help me, and all the gold is yours." Mord's strap licked out, but it was a half-hearted, desultory swing, slow and contemptuous. Tyrion caught the letter in his hand and held it prisoned. "There will be no risk to you. All you need to do is deliver a message." The gaoler yanked his leather strap free of Tyrion's grasp. "Message," he said, as if he had never heard the word before. His roan made deep creases in his brow. "You heard me, my lord. Only carry my word to your lady. Tell her—" What? What would possibly make Lysa Arryn relent? The inspiration came to Tyrion Lannister suddenly. "Tell her that I wish to confess my crimes." Maud raised his arm and Tyrion braced himself for another blow, but the turnkey hesitated. Suspicion and greed whirred in his eyes. He wanted that gold, yet he feared a trick. He had the look of a man who had often been tricked. "Is lie," he muttered darkly. "Dwarf man cheat me." "I will put my promise in writing," Tyrion vowed. Some illiterates held writing in disdain. Others seemed to have a superstitious reverence for the written words, as if it were some sort of magic. Fortunately, Maud was one of the latter. The turnkey lowered the strap. "Writing down gold. Much gold." "Oh, much gold," Tyrion assured him. "The purse is just a taste, my friend. My brother wears armor of solid gold plate." In truth, Jaime's armor was gilded steel, but this oaf would never know the difference. Mord fingered his strap thoughtfully, but in the end he relented and went to fetch paper and ink. When the letter was written, the Gaoler frowned at it suspiciously. "Now, deliver my message," Tyrion urged. He was shivering in his sleep when they came for him, late that night. Mord opened the door, but kept his silence. Sir Vardis Egan woke Tyrion with the point of his boot. "On your feet, imp! My lady wants to see you." Tyrion rubbed the sleep from his eyes and put on a grimace he scarcely felt. "No doubt she does, but what makes you think I wish to see her?" Sir Vardis frowned. Tyrion remembered him well from the years he had spent at King's Landing as the captain of the Hand's household guard. A square, plain face, silver hair, a heavy build and no humour whatsoever. "Your wishes are not my concern. On your feet, or I'll have you carried." Tyrion clambered awkwardly to his feet. "A cold night," he said casually, "and the high hall is so draughty. I don't wish to catch a chill. Mord, if you would be so good, fetch my cloak." The Gaoler squinted at him, face dull with suspicion. "My cloak," Tyrion repeated. "The shadow skin you took from me for safekeeping. You recall?" "Get him the damnable cloak," Sir Vardis said. Mord did not dare grumble. He gave Tyrion a glare that promised future retribution, yet he went for the cloak. When he draped it around his prisoner's neck, Tyrion smiled. "My thanks. I shall think of you whenever I wear it." He flung the trailing end of the long fur over his right shoulder, and felt warm for the first time in days. "Lead on, Sir Vardis." The high hall of the Arons was aglow with the light of 50 torches, burning in the sconces along the walls. The Lady Lisa wore black silk, with the moon and falcon sewn on her breast in pearls. Since she did not look the sort to join the night's watch, Tyrion could only imagine that she had decided mourning clothes were appropriate garb for a confession. Her long auburn hair, woven into an elaborate braid, fell across her left shoulder. The taller throne beside her was empty. No doubt the little Lord of the Eyrie was off shaking in his sleep. Tyrion was thankful for that, at least. He bowed deeply and took a moment to glance around the hall. Lady Arryn had summoned her knights and retainers to hear his confession, as he had hoped. He saw Sir Brynden Tully's craggy face, and Lord Nestor Royce's bluff one. Beside Nestor stood a younger man with fierce black-side whiskers who could only be his heir, Sir Alba. Most of the principal houses of the Vale were represented. Tyrion noted Sir Lyn Corbray, slender as a sword, Lord Hunter with his gouty legs, the widowed Lady Waynwood surrounded by her sons. Others sported sigils he did not know: Broken Lance, Green Viper, Burning Tower, Winged Chalice. Among the lords of the Vale were several of his companions from the high road. Sir Roderick Castle, pale from half-healed wounds, stood with Sir Willis Rode beside him. Marillion the Singer had found a new wood harp. Tyrion smiled. Whatever happened here tonight, he did not wish it to happen in secret, and there was no one like a singer for spreading a story near and far. In the rear of the hall, Bronn lounged beneath a pillar. The free rider's black eyes were fixed on Tyrion, and his hand lay lightly on the pommel of his sword. Tyrion gave him a long look, wondering. Catelyn Stark spoke first. "You wish to confess your crimes, we are told." "I do, my lady," Tyrion answered. Lisa Arryn smiled at her sister. "The sky excels always break them. The gods can see them there, and there is no darkness to hide in." "He does not look broken to me," Lady Catelyn said. Lady Lisa paid her no mind. "Say what you will." she commanded Tyrion. And now to roll the dice, he thought with another quick glance back at Bronn.
Where to begin? I'm a wild little man, I confess it. My crimes and sins are beyond counting, my lords and ladies. I have lain with horse, not once but hundreds of times. I have wished my own lord father dead, and my sister, our gracious queen, as well.
Behind him someone chuckled.
I have not always treated my servants with kindness. I have gambled. I have even cheated, I blush to admit. I have said many cruel and malicious things about the noble lords and ladies of the court.
That drew outright laughter.
Once I...
Silence! Lysa Arryn's pale round face had turned a burning pink. What do you imagine you're doing, dwarf? Tyrion cocked his head to one side.
Why, confessing my crimes, my lady.
Catelyn Stark took a step forward. You are accused of sending a hired knife to slay my son Bran in his bed, and of conspiring to murder Lord Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King.
Tyrion gave a helpless shrug. Those crimes I cannot confess, I fear. I know nothing of any murders.
Lady Lysa rose from her weirwood throne. I will not be made mock of. You have had your little jape, imp. I trust you enjoyed it. Savardis, take him back to the dungeon, but this time find him a smaller cell with a floor more sharply sloped.
Is this how justice is done in the Vale?
Tyrion roared, so loudly that Savardis froze for an instant.
Does honor stop at the bloody gate? You accuse me of crimes I deny them, so you throw me into an open cell to freeze and starve.
He lifted his head to give them all a good look at the bruises Mord had left on his face.
Where is the king's justice? Is the Eyrie not part of the Seven Kingdoms? I stand accused, you say. Very well. I demand a trial. Let me speak, and let my truth or falsehood be judged openly, in the sight of gods and men.
A low murmuring filled the high hall. He had her, Tyrion knew. He was high-born, the son of the most powerful lord in the realm, the brother of the queen. He could not be denied a trial. Guardsmen in sky-blue cloaks had started toward Tyrion, but Savardis bid them halt and look to Lady Lysa. Her small mouth twitched in a petulant smile. If you are tried and found to be guilty of the crimes for which you stand accused, then by the king's own laws you must pay with your life's blood. We keep no headsman in the Eyrie, my lord of Lannister. Open the moon door. The press of spectators parted. A narrow weirwood door stood between two slender marble pillars, a crescent moon carved in the white wood. Those standing closest edged backward as a pair of guardsmen marched through. One man removed the heavy bronze bars. The second pulled the door inward. Their blue cloaks rose snapping from their shoulders, caught in a sudden gust of wind that came howling through the open door. Beyond was the emptiness of the night sky, speckled with cold, uncaring stars. Behold the king's justice, Lysa Arryn said. Torch flames fluttered like pennons along the walls, and here and there the odd torch gutted out. Lysa, I think this is unwise, Catelyn Stark said as the black wind swirled around the hall. Her sister ignored her. You want a trial, my lord of Lannister? Very well, a trial you shall have. My son will listen to whatever you care to say, and you shall hear his judgment. Then you may leave, by one door or the other. She looked so pleased with herself, Tyrion thought, and small wonder. How could a trial threaten her when her weaking son was the Lord Judge? Tyrion glanced at her moon door. Mother, I want to see him fly, the boy had said. How many men had the snot-nosed little wretch sent through that door already?
I thank you, my good lady, but I see no need to trouble Lord Robert, Tyrion said politely. The gods know the truth of my innocence. I will have their verdict, not the judgment of men. I demand trial by combat. A storm of sudden laughter filled the high hall of the Arryns. Lord Nestor Royce snorted, Sir Willis chuckled, Sir Lyn Corbray guffawed, and others threw back their heads and howled until tears ran down their faces. Marillion clumsily plucked a gay note on his new woodharp with the fingers of his broken hand. Even the wind seemed to whistle with derision as it came skirling through the moon door. Lysa Arryn's watery blue eyes looked uncertain. He had caught her off balance. You have that right, to be sure. The young knight with the green viper embroidered on his surcoat stepped forward and went to one knee. My lady, I beg the boon of championing your cause. The honour should be mine, old Lord Hunter said. For the love I bore your lord husband, let me avenge his death. My father served Lord John faithfully as High Steward of the Whale, Sir Alba Royce boomed. Let me serve his son in this.
The gods favour the man with the just cause, said Sir Lyn Corbray. Yet often that turns out to be the man with the surest sword. We all know who that is. He smiled modestly. A dozen other men all spoke at once, clamouring to be heard. Tyrion found it disheartening to realize so many strangers were eager to kill him. Perhaps this had not been such a clever plan after all. Lady Lysa raised a hand for silence. I thank you, my lords, as I know my son would thank you if he were among us. No man in the 7 kingdoms are as bold and true as the Knights of the Whale. Would that I could grant you all this honour, yet I can choose only one. She gestured. Sir Vardis Egan, you were ever my lord husband's good right hand. You shall be our champion. Sir Vardis had been singularly silent.
My lady, he said gravely, sinking to one knee. Pray give this burden to another. I have no taste for it. The man is no warrior. Look at him. A dwarf, half my size and lame in the legs. It would be shameful to slaughter such a man and call it justice.
Oh, excellent, Tyrion thought.
I agree.
Lysa glared at him. You demanded a trial by combat.
And now I demand a champion such as you have chosen for yourself. My brother Jaime will gladly take my part, I know.
Your precious Kingslayer is hundreds of leagues from here, snapped Lysa Arryn.
Send a bird for him. I will gladly await his arrival.
You will face Sir Vardis on the morrow.
Singer, Tyrion said, turning to Marillion. When you make a ballad of this, be certain you tell them how Lady Arryn denied the dwarf the right to a champion, and sent him forth lame and bruised and hobbling to face her finest knight.
I deny you nothing, Lysa Arryn said, her voice peeved and shrill with irritation. Name your champion, imp, if you think you can find a man to die for you.
If it is all the same to you, I'd sooner find one to kill for me. Tyrion looked over the long hall. No one moved. For a long moment he wondered if it had been all a colossal blunder. Then there was a stirring in the rear of the chamber. I'll stand for the dwarf, Bronn called out.
Chapter 39. Eddard. He dreamt an old dream of 3 knights in white cloaks and a tower long fallen, and Lyanna in her bed of blood. In the dream his friend rode with him as they had in life. Proud Martin Castle, Jory's father, faithful Theowool, Ethan Glower, who had been Brandon's squire, Sir Mark Riswell, soft of speech and gentle of heart, the Crannogman, Howland Reed, Lord Dustin on his great rat stallion. Ned had known their faces as well as he knew his own once, but the years leech at a man's memories, even those he has vowed never to forget. In the dream they were only shadows, grey wraiths on horses made of mist. They were 7, facing 3, in the dream as it had been in life. Yet these were no ordinary 3. They waited before the round tower, the red mountains of Dorne at their backs, their white cloaks blowing in the wind. And these were no shadows. Their faces burned clear, even now. Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, had a sad smile on his lips. The hilt of the great sword Dawn poked up over his right shoulder. Sir Oswald Went was on one knee, sharpening his blade with a whetstone. Across his white enamelled helm, the black bat of his house spread its wings. Between them stood fierce old Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard.
I looked for you in the Trident,
Ned said to them. We were not there, Sir Gerald answered.
Woe to the usurper if we had been,
said Sir Oswald.
When King's Landing fell, Sir Jaime slew your king with a golden sword, and I wondered where you were.
Far away, Sir Gerald said.
Or Aerys would yet sit the Iron Throne, and our false brother would burn in 7 hells. I came down on Storm's End to lift the siege, Ned told them. And the Lords Tyrell and Redwyne dipped their banners, and all their knights bent the knee to pledge us fealty. I was certain you would be among them. Our knees do not bend easily, said Sir Arthur Dayne. Sir Willem Darries fled to Dragonstone with your queen and Prince Viserys. I thought you might have sailed with him." "Sir Willem is a good man and true," said Sir Oswell. "But not of the Kingsguard," Sir Gerald pointed out. "The Kingsguard does not flee." "Then or now," said Sir Arthur. He donned his helm. "We swore a vow," explained old Sir Gerald. Ned's wraiths moved up beside him with shadow swords in hand. They were 7 against 3. "And now it begins," said Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. He unsheathed Dawn and held it with both hands. The blade was pale as milk glass, alive with light. "No," Ned said with sadness in his voice. "Now it ends." As they came together in a rush of steel and shadow, he could hear Lyanna screaming. "Eddard!" she called. A storm of rose petals blew across a blood-streaked sky, as blue as the eyes of death. "Lord Eddard!" Lyanna called again. "I promise," he whispered. "Leah, I promise." "Lord Eddard!" a man echoed from the dark. Groaning, Eddard Stark opened his eyes. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows of the Tower of the Hand. "Lord Eddard?" A shadow stood over the bed. How long?" The sheets were tangled, his legs splintered and plastered. A dull throb of pain shot up his side. 6 days and 7 nights. The voice was Vayen Poole's. The steward held a cup to Ned's lips. "Drink, my lord." "What?" "Only water. Master Pycelle said you would be thirsty." Ned drank. His lips were parched and cracked. The water tasted sweet as honey. "The king left orders," Vayen Poole told him when the cup was empty. "He would speak with you, my lord." "On the morrow," Ned said, "when I'm stronger." He could not face Robert now. The dream had left him weak as a kitten. "My lord," Poole said, "he commanded us to send you to him the moment you opened your eyes." The steward busied himself lighting a bedside candle. Ned cursed softly. Robert was never known for his patience. "Tell him I'm too weak to come to him. If he wishes to speak with me, I should be pleased to receive him here. I hope you wake him from a sound sleep, and summon—" He was about to say Jory when he remembered. "Summon the captain of my guard." Alan stepped into the bedchamber a few moments after the steward had taken his leave. "My lord?" "Poole tells me it has been 6 days," Ned said. "I must know how things stand." "The King's Slayers fled the city," Alan told him. "The talk is he's ridden back to Casterly Rock to join his father. The story of how Lady Caitlin took the imp is on every lip. I've put on extra guards, if it please you." "It does," Ned assured him. "My daughters?" "They've been with you every day, my lord. Sansa prays quietly, but Arya—" He hesitated. "She has not said a word since they brought you back. She's a fierce little thing, my lord. I've never seen such anger in a girl." "Whatever happens," Ned said, "I want my daughters kept safe. I fear this is only the beginning." "No harm will come to them, Lord Eddard," Alan said. "I stake my life on that." "Jory and the others?" "I gave them over to the Silent Sisters to be sent north to Winterfell. Jory would want to lie beside his grandfather." It would have to be his grandfather, for Jory's father was buried far to the south. Martin Castle had perished with the rest. Ned had pulled the tower down afterward, and used its bloody stones to build 8 cairns upon the ridge. It was said that Rhaegar had named that place the Tower of Joy, but for Ned it was a bitter memory. They had been 7 against 3, yet only 2 had lived to ride away. Eddard Stark himself and the little Crannog man, Howland Reed. He did not think it omened well that he should dream that dream again after so many years. "You've done well, Alan," Ned was saying when Vayen Poole returned. The steward bowed low. "His grace is without, my lord, and the queen with him." Ned pushed himself up higher, wincing as his leg trembled with pain. He had not expected Cersei to come. It did not bode well that she had. "Send them in and leave us. What we have to say should not go beyond these walls." Poole withdrew quietly. Robert had taken time to dress. He wore a black velvet doublet with a crowned stag of Baratheon worked upon the breast in golden thread, and a golden mantle with a cloak of black and gold squares.
A flagon of wine was in his hand, his face already flushed from drink. Cersei Lannister entered behind him, a jeweled tiara in her hair.
"Your Grace," Ned said. "Your pardons, I cannot rise." "No matter," the king said gruffly. "Some wine? From the arbor, a good vintage." "A small cup," Ned said. "My head is still heavy from the milk of the poppy."
"A man in your place should count himself fortunate that his head is still on his shoulders," the queen declared.
"Quiet, woman,"
Robert snapped. He brought Ned a cup of wine.
"Does the leg still pain you?" "Some,"
Ned said. His head was swimming, but it would not do to admit to weakness in front of the queen.
"Pycelle swears it will heal clean," Robert frowned. "I take it you know what Catelyn has done?" "I do."
Ned took a small swallow of wine.
"My lady wife is blameless, your grace. All she did at my command."
"I'm not pleased, Ned," Robert grumbled. "By what right do you dare lay hands on my blood?" Cersei demanded. "Who do you think you are?"
"The hand of the king,"
Ned told her with icy courtesy.
"Charged by your own lord husband to keep the king's peace and enforce the king's justice."
"You were the hand," Cersei began. "But now, silence!" the king roared.
"You asked him a question and he answered it."
Cersei subsided, cold with anger, and Robert turned back to Ned.
"Keep the king's peace, you say? Is this how you keep my peace, Ned? 7 men are dead."
8, the queen corrected. "Traeger died this morning of the blow Lord Stark gave him."
"Abductions on the King's Road and drunken slaughter in my streets," the king said. "I will not have it, Ned. Catelyn had good reason for taking the imp."
"I said I will not have it. To hell with her reasons. You will command her to release the dwarf at once, and you will make your peace with Jaime."
3 of my men were butchered before my eyes because Jaime Lannister wished to chasten me. Am I to forget that?"
"My brother was not the cause of this quarrel," Cersei told the king. "Lord Stark was returning drunk from a brothel. His men attacked Jaime and his guards, even as his wife attacked Tyrion on the King's Road."
"You know me better than that, Robert," Ned said. "Ask Lord Baelish if you doubt me. He was there."
"I've talked to Littlefinger," Robert said.
"He claims he rode off to bring the gold cloaks before the fighting began, but he admits you were returning from some whore house." "Some whore house! Damn your eyes, Robert, I went there to have a look at your daughter. Her mother has named her Bara. She looks like that first girl you fathered when we were boys together in the Vale."
He watched the queen as he spoke. Her face was a mask, still and pale, betraying nothing. Robert flushed.
"Bara," he grumbled. "Is that supposed to please me? Damn the girl. I thought she had more sense." "She cannot be more than 15 and a whore, and you thought she had sense,"
Ned said, incredulous. His leg was beginning to pain him sorely. It was hard to keep his temper.
"The fool child is in love with you, Robert."
The king glanced at Cersei.
"This is no fit subject for the queen's ears. Her grace will have no liking for anything I have to say," Ned replied. "I'm told the Kingslayer has fled the city. Give me leave to bring him back to justice."
The king swallowed the wine in his cup, brooding. He took a swallow.
"No," he said. "I want no more of this. Jaime slew 3 of your men and you 5 of his. Now it ends." "Is that your notion of justice?" Ned flared. "If so, I'm pleased that I'm no longer your hand."
The queen looked to her husband. "If any man had dared speak to a Targaryen as he has spoken to you—"
"Do you take me for Aerys?"
Robert interrupted. "I took you for a king. Jaime and Tyrion are your own brothers, by all the laws of marriage and the bonds we share. The Starks have driven off the one and seized the other. This man dishonors you with every breath he takes, and yet you stand there meekly, asking if his leg pains him and would he like some wine." Robert's face was dark with anger.
"How many times must I tell you to hold your tongue, woman?"
Cersei's face was a study in contempt. "What a jape the gods have made of us two," she said. "By all rights, you ought to be in skirts and me in mail." Purple with rage, the king lashed out, a vicious backhand blow to the side of the head. She stumbled against the table and fell hard, yet Cersei Lannister did not cry out. Her slender fingers brushed her cheek, where the pale smooth skin was already reddening. On the morrow the bruise would cover half her face. I shall wear this as a badge of honor, she announced.
Wear it in silence or I'll honor you again,
Robert vowed. He shouted for a guard. Sir Meryn Trant stepped into the room, tall and sombre in his white armor.
The queen is tired. See her to her bedchamber.
The knight helped Cersei to her feet and led her out without a word. Robert reached for the flagon and refilled his cup.
You see what she does to me, Ned?
The king seated himself, cradling his wine cup.
My loving wife, the mother of my children.
The rage was gone from him now. In his eyes Ned saw something sad and scared.
I should not have hit her. That was not kingly.
He stared down at his hands as if he did not quite know what they were.
I was always strong. No one could stand before me, no one. How do you fight someone if you can't hit them?
Confused, the king shook his head.
Rhaegar won, damn him. I killed him, Ned. I drove the spike right through that black armor into his black heart, and he died at my feet. They made up songs about it, yet somehow he still won. He has Lyanna now, and I have her.
The king drained his cup.
Your Grace,
Ned Stark said.
We must talk.
Robert pressed his fingertips against his temples.
I'm sick unto death of talk. On the morrow I'm going to the Kingswood to hunt. Whatever you have to say can wait until I return. If the gods are good, I shall not be here on your return. You commanded me to return to Winterfell, remember?
Robert stood up, grasping one of the bedposts to steady himself.
The gods are seldom good, Ned. Here, this is yours.
He pulled the heavy silver hand clasp from a pocket in the lining of his cloak and tossed it on the bed.
Like it or not, you are my hand, damn you. I forbid you to leave.
Ned picked up the silver clasp. He was being given no choice, it seemed. His leg throbbed, and he felt as helpless as a child.
The Targaryen girl. The king groaned. 7 hells, don't start with her again. That's done. I'll hear no more of it. Why would you want me as your hand if you refuse to listen to my counsel?
Why? Robert laughed.
Why not? Someone has to rule this damnable kingdom. Put on the badge, Ned. It suits you. And if you ever throw it in my face again, I swear to you, I'll pin the damn thing on Jaime Lannister.
Chapter 40. Catelyn. The eastern sky was rose and gold as the sun broke over the Vale of Arryn. Catelyn Stark watched the light spread, her hands resting on the delicate carved stone of the balustrade outside her window. Below her, the world turned from black to indigo to green as dawn crept across fields and forests. Pale white mists rose off Alyssa's Tears, where the ghost waters plunged over the shoulder of the mountain to begin their long tumble down the face of the giant's lands. Catelyn could feel the faint touch of spray on her face. Alyssa Arryn had seen her husband, her brothers, and all her children slain, and yet in life she had never shed a tear. So in death, the gods had decreed that she would know no rest until her weeping watered the black earth of the Vale, where the men she had loved were buried. Alyssa had been dead 6,000 years now, and still no drop of the torrent had ever reached the valley floor far below. Catelyn wondered how large a waterfall her own tears would make when she died. "Tell me the rest of it," she said.
"The Kingslayer is massing a host at Casterly Rock,"
Sir Roderick Cassel answered from the room behind her.
"Your brother writes that he has sent riders to the rock, demanding that Lord Tywin proclaims his intent, but he has had no answer. Edmure has commanded Lord Vance and Lord Piper to guard the pass below the Golden Tooth. He vows to you that he will yield no foot of Tully land without first watering it with Lannister blood."
Catelyn turned away from the sunrise. Its beauty did little to lighten her mood. It seemed cruel for a day to dawn so fair and end so foul as this one promised to. "Edmure has sent riders and made vows," she said. "But Edmure is not the Lord of Riverrun. What of my Lord Father?"
"The message made no mention of Lord Hoster, my lady."
Sir Roderick tugged at his whiskers. They had grown in white as snow and bristly as a thorn bush while he was recovering from his wounds. He looked almost himself again. "My father would not have given the defense of Riverrun over to Edmure unless he was very sick," she said, worried. I should have been woken as soon as this bird arrived.
Your lady sister thought it better to let you sleep, Master Coleman told me.
I should have been woken, she insisted.
The master tells me your sister planned to speak with you after the combat, Sir Roderick said.
Then she still plans to go through with this mammoth farce, Caitlin grimaced. The dwarf has played her like a set of pipes, and she's too deaf to hear the tune. Whatever happens this morning, Sir Roderick, it is past time we took our leave. My place is at Winterfell with my sons. If you're strong enough to travel, I shall ask Lisa for an escort to see us to Gulltown. We can take ship from there.
Another ship?
Sir Roderick looked a shade green, yet he managed not to shudder.
As you say, my lady.
The old knight waited outside her door as Caitlin summoned the servants Lisa had given her. If she spoke to her sister before the duel, perhaps she could change her mind, she thought as they dressed her. Lisa's policies varied with her moods, and her moods changed hourly. The shy girl she had known at Riverrun had grown into a woman who was by turns proud, fearful, cruel, dreamy, reckless, timid, stubborn, vain, and, above all, inconstant. When that wild turnkey of hers had come crawling to tell them that Tyrion Lannister wished to confess, Caitlin had urged Lisa to have the dwarf brought to them privately, but no, nothing would do better that her sister must make a show of him before half the Vale. And now this. Lannister is my prisoner, she told Sir Roderick as they descended the tower stairs and made their way through the Erie's cold white halls. Caitlin wore plain grey wool with a silvered belt. My sister must be reminded of that. At the doors to Lisa's apartments, they met her uncle storming out.
Going to join the Fool's Festival? Sir Brynden snapped. I'd tell you to slap some sense into your sister if I thought it would do any good, but you'd only bruise your hand.
There was a bird from Riverrun, Caitlin began. A letter from Edma.
I know, child.
The black fish that fastened his cloak was Brynden's only concession to ornament.
I had to hear it from Master Coleman. I asked your sister for leave to take 1,000 seasoned men and ride for Riverrun with all haste. Do you know what she told me? The Vale cannot spare 1,000 swords, nor even one, uncle, she said. You're the Knight of the Gate, your place is here.
A gust of childish laughter drifted through the open doors behind him, and her uncle glanced darkly over his shoulder.
Well, I told her she could bloody well find herself a new Knight of the Gate. Blackfish or no, I'm still a Tully. I shall leave for Riverrun by evenfall.
Caitlin could not pretend to surprise. Alone? You know as well as I that you will never survive the high road. Sir Roderick and I are returning to Winterfell. Come with us, uncle. I will give you your 1,000 men. Riverrun will not fight alone. Brynden thought a moment, then nodded a brisk agreement.
As you say. It's the long way home, but I'm more like to get there. I'll wait for you below.
He went striding off, his cloak swirling behind him. Caitlin exchanged a look with Sir Roderick. They went through the doors to the high, nervous sound of a child's giggles. Lisa's apartments opened over a small garden, a circle of dirt and grass planted with blue flowers, and ringed on all sides by tall white towers. The builders had intended it as a godswood, but the Eyrie rested on the hard stone of the mountain, and no matter how much soil was hauled up from the Vale, they could not get a weirwood to take root here. So the lords of the Eyrie planted grass and scattered statuary amidst low, flowering shrubs. It was there the two champions would meet to place their lives, and that of Tyrion Lannister, into the hands of the gods. Lisa, freshly scrubbed and garbed in cream velvet with a robe of sapphires and moonsters around her milk-white neck, was holding court on the terrace overlooking the scene of the combat, surrounded by her knights, retainers, and lords high and low. Most of them still hoped to wed her, bet her, and rule the Vale of Arryn by her side. From what Caitlin had seen during her stay at the Eyrie, it was a vain hope. A wooden platform had been built to elevate Robert's chair. There the Lord of the Eyrie sat, giggling and clapping his hands as a humpbacked puppeteer in blue and white motley made two wooden knights hack and slash each other. Pitchers of thick cream and baskets of blackberries had been set out, and the guests were sipping a sweet orange-scented wine from engraved silver cups. A fool's festival, Brynden had called it, and small wonder. Across the terrace, Lisa laughed gaily at some jest of Lord Hunter's, and nibbled a blackberry from the point of Sir Lyn Corbray's dagger. They were the suitors who stood highest in Lisa's favour, today at least. Caitlin would have been hard-pressed to say which man was more unsuitable. Ian Hunter was even older than Jon Arryn had been, half crippled by gout and cursed with 3 quarrelsome sons, each more grasping than the last. Sir Lyn was a different sort of folly, lean and handsome, heir to an ancient but impoverished house, but vain, reckless, hot-tempered, and, it was whispered, notoriously uninterested in the intimate charms of women. When Lisa espied Caitlin, she welcomed her with a sisterly embrace and a moist kiss on the cheek. "Isn't it a lovely morning? The gods are smiling on us. Do try a cup of the wine, sweet sister. Lord Hunter was kind enough to send for it from his own cellars." "Thank you, no. Lisa, we must talk." "After," her sister promised, already beginning to turn away from her. "Now." Caitlin spoke more loudly than she'd intended. Men were turning to look. "Lisa, you cannot mean to go ahead with this folly. Alive, the imp has value. Dead, he is only food for crows. And if his champion should prevail here—" "Small chance of that, my lady," Lord Hunter assured her, patting her shoulder with a liver-spotted hand. "Sir Vardis is a doughty fighter. He will make short work of the sellsword." "Will he, my lord?" Caitlin said coolly. "I wonder." She had seen Bronn fight on the high road. It was no accident that he had survived the journey while other men had died. He moved like a panther, and that ugly sword of his seemed a part of his arm. Lisa's suitors were gathering around them like bees around a blossom. "Women understand little of these things," Sir Morton Waynwood said. "Sir Vardis is a knight, sweet lady. This other fellow, well, his sort are all cowards at heart, useful enough in a battle with thousands of their fellows around them, but stand them up alone and the manhood leaks right out of them." "Say you have the truth of it, then," Caitlin said with a curtsy that made her mouth ache. "What will we gain by the dwarf's death? Do you imagine that Jaime will care a fig that we gave his brother a trial before we flung him off a mountain?" "Behead the man," Sir Lyn Corbray suggested. "When the Kingslayer receives the imp's head, it will be a warning to him." Lisa gave an impatient shake of her waist-long auburn hair. "Lord Robert wants to see him fly," she said, as if that settled the matter. "And the imp has only himself to blame. It was he who demanded a trial by combat." "Lady Lisa had no honourable way to deny him, even if she'd wished to," Lord Hunter intoned ponderously. Ignoring them all, Caitlin turned all her force on her sister. "I remind you, Tyrion Lannister is my prisoner." "And I remind you the dwarf murdered my lord husband." Her voice rose. "He poisoned the hand of the king and left my sweet baby fatherless, and now I mean to see him pay." Whirling, her skirts swinging around her, Lisa stalked across the terrace. Sir Lyn and Sir Morton and the other suitors excused themselves with cool nods and trailed after her. "Do you think he did it?" Sir Roderick asked her quietly when they were alone again. "Murder Lord Jon, that is. The imp still denies it, and most fiercely." "I believe the Lannisters murdered Lord Arryn," Caitlin replied. "But whether it was Tyrion or Sir Jaime, or the Queen, or all of them together, I could not begin to say." Lisa had named Cersei the letter she had sent to Winterfell, but now she seemed certain that Tyrion was the killer. Perhaps because the dwarf was here, while the Queen was safe behind the walls of the Red Keep, hundreds of leagues to the south. Caitlin almost wished she had burned her sister's letter before reading it. Sir Roderick tugged at his whiskers. "Poison, well, that could be the dwarf's work, true enough. Or Cersei's. It's said poison is a woman's weapon, begging your pardons, my lady. The Kingslayer, now. I have no great liking for the man, but he's not that sort. Too fond of the sight of blood on that golden sword of his. Was it poison, my lady?" Caitlin frowned, vaguely uneasy. How else could they make it look a natural death? Behind her, Lord Robert shrieked with delight as one of the puppet knights sliced the other in half, spilling a fluid of red sawdust into the terrace. She glanced at her nephew and sighed. "The boy is utterly without discipline. He will never be strong enough to rule unless he is taken away from his mother for a time." "Is Lord Father agreed with you?" said a voice at her elbow. She turned to behold Master Coleman, a cup of wine in his hand.
He was planning to send the boy to Dragonstone for fostering, you know. Oh, but I'm speaking out of turn.
The apple of his throat bobbed anxiously beneath the loose master's chain.
I fear I've had too much of Lord Hunter's excellent wine. The prospect of bloodshed has my nerves all afray.
You are mistaken, master, Caitlin said. It was Casterly Rock, not Dragonstone, and those arrangements were made after the hen's death, without my sister's consent. The master's head jerked so vigorously at the end of his absurdly long neck that he looked half a puppet himself.
No, begging your forgiveness, my lady, but it was Lord John who—
A bell tolled loudly below them. High lords and serving girls alike broke off what they were doing and moved to the balustrade. Below, 2 guardsmen in sky-blue cloaks led forth Tyrion Lannister. The Eyrie's plump scepter escorted him to the statue in the center of the garden, a weeping woman carved in veined white marble, no doubt meant to be Alyssa.
"The bad little man,"
Lord Robert said, giggling.
"Mother, can I make him fly? I want to see him fly." "Later, my sweet baby,"
Lisa promised him.
"Trial first,"
drawled Sir Lyn Corbray.
"Then execution."
A moment later the 2 champions appeared from opposite sides of the garden. The knight was attended by 2 young squires, the sellsword by the Eyrie's master-at-arms. Sir Vardis Egan was steel from head to heel, encased in heavy plate armor over mail and padded surcoat. Large circular rondels, enamelled cream and blue in the mooned falcon sigil of House Arryn, protected the vulnerable juncture of arm and breast. A skirt of lobstered metal covered him from waist to mid-thigh, while a solid gorget encircled his throat. Falcon's wings sprouted from the temples of his helm, and his visor was a pointed metal beak with a narrow slit for vision. Bronn was so lightly armored he looked almost naked beside the knight. He wore only a shirt of black oiled ringmail over boiled leather, a round steel half-helm with a nose-guard, and a mail coif. High leather boots with steel shin guards gave some protection to his legs, and discs of black iron were sewn into the fingers of his gloves. Yet Caitlin noted that the sellsword stood half a hand taller than his foe, with a longer reach, and Bronn was 15 years younger, if she was any judge. They knelt in the grass beneath the weeping woman, facing each other, with Lannister between them. The Septon removed a faced crystal sphere from the soft cloth bag at his waist. He lifted it high above his head, and the light shattered. Rainbows danced across the imp's face. In a high, solemn sing-song voice, the Septon asked the gods to look down and bear witness, to find the truth in this man's soul, to grant him life and freedom if he was innocent, death if he was guilty. His voice echoed of the surrounding towers. When the last echo had died away, the Septon lowered his crystal and made a hasty departure. Tyrion leaned over and whispered something in Bronn's ear before the guardsman led him away. The sellsword rose laughing and brushed a blade of grass from his knee. Robert Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie and Defender of the Vale, was fidgeting impatiently in his elevated chair.
"When are they going to fight?"
he asked plaintively. Sir Vardis was held back to his feet by one of his squires. The other brought him a triangular shield almost 4 feet tall, heavy oak dotted with iron studs. They strapped it to his left forearm. When Lisa's master-at-arms offered Bronn a similar shield, the sellsword spat and waved it away. 3 days' growth of coarse black beard covered his joined cheeks, but if he did not shave it was not for want of a razor. The edge of his sword had the dangerous glimmer of steel that had been honed every day for hours, until it was too sharp to touch. Sir Vardis held out a gauntleted hand, and his squire placed a handsome double-edged longsword in his grasp. The blade was engraved with a delicate silver tracery of a mountain sky. Its pommel was a falcon's head, its crossguard fashioned into the shape of wings.
"I had that sword crafted for Jon in King's Landing,"
Lisa told her guests proudly as they watched Sir Vardis try a practice cut.
"He wore it whenever he sat the Iron Throne in King Robert's place. Isn't it a lovely thing? I thought it only fitting that our champion avenged Jon with his own blade."
The engraved silver blade was beautiful beyond a doubt, but it seemed to Caitlin that Sir Vardis might have been more comfortable with his own sword. Yet she said nothing. She was weary of futile arguments with her sister.
"Make them fight!"
Lord Robert called out. Sir Vardis faced the Lord of the Eyrie and lifted his sword in salute.
For the Eyrie and the Vale.
Tyrion Lannister had been seated on a balcony across the garden, flanked by his own guards. It was to him that Bronn turned with a cursory salute.
"They await your command,"
Lady Lysa said to her lord's son.
"Fight!"
the boy screamed, his arms trembling as they clutched at his chair. Ser Vardis swiveled, bringing up his heavy shield. Bronn turned to face him. Their swords rang together, once, twice, attesting. The sellsword backed off a step. The knight came after, holding his shield before him. He tried a slash, but Bronn jerked back, just out of reach, and the silver blade cut only air. Bronn circled to his right. Ser Vardis turned to follow, keeping his shield between them. The knight pressed forward, placing each foot carefully on the uneven ground. The sellsword gave way, a faint smile playing over his lips. Ser Vardis attacked, slashing, but Bronn leapt away from him, hopping lightly over a low moss-covered stone. Now the sellsword circled left, away from the shield, toward the knight's unprotected side. Ser Vardis tried a hack at his legs, but he did not have the reach. Bronn danced farther to his left. Ser Vardis turned in place.
"The man is craven,"
Lord Hunter declared.
"Stand and fight, coward!"
Other voices echoed the sentiment. Catelyn looked to Sir Roderick. Her master-at-arms gave a curt shake of his head.
"He wants to make Ser Vardis chase him. The weight of armor and shield will tire even the strongest man."
She had seen men practice at their swordplay near every day of her life, had viewed 100 tourneys in her time, but this was something different and deadlier. A dance where the smallest misstep meant death. And as she watched, the memory of another duel in another time came back to Catelyn Stark, as vivid as if it had been yesterday. They met in the lower bailey of Riverrun. When Brandon saw that Pettyr wore only helm and breastplate and mail, he took off most of his armor. Pettyr had begged her for a favor he might wear, but she had turned him away. Her lord father promised her to Brandon Stark, and so it was to him that she gave her token, a pale blue handscarf she had embroidered with the leaping trout of Riverrun. As she pressed it into his hand, she pleaded with him. "He's only a foolish boy, but I have loved him like a brother. It would grieve me to see him die." And her betrothed looked at her with the cool grey eyes of a stork, and promised to spare the boy who loved her. That fight was over almost as soon as it began. Brandon was a man grown, and he drove Littlefinger all the way across the bailey and down the water stair, raining steel on him with every step, until the boy was staggering and bleeding from a dozen wounds.
"Yield!"
he called, more than once, but Pettyr would only shake his head and fight on, grimly. When the river was lapping at their ankles, Brandon finally ended it, with a brutal backhand cut that bit through Pettyr's rings and leather into the soft flesh below the ribs, so deep that Catelyn was certain that the wound was mortal. He looked at her as he fell and murmured, "Cat," as the bright blood came flowing out between his mailed fingers. She thought she had forgotten that. That was the last time she had seen his face, until the day she was brought before him in King's Landing. A fortnight passed before Littlefinger was strong enough to leave Riverrun, but her lord father forbade her to visit him in the tower where he lay abed. Lysa helped her master nurse him. She had been softer and shyer in those days. Edmure had called on him as well, but Pettyr had sent him away. Her brother had acted as Brandon's squire at the duel, and Littlefinger would not forgive that. As soon as he was strong enough to be moved, Lord Hoster Tully sent Pettyr Baelish away in a closed litter to finish his healing on the fingers upon the windswept jut of rock where he'd been born. The ringing clash of steel on steel jarred Catelyn back to the present. Ser Vardis was coming hard at Bronn, driving into him with shield and sword. The sellsword scrambled backward, checking each blow, stepping lightly over rock and root, his eyes never leaving his foe. He was quicker, Catelyn saw. The knight's silvered sword never came near to touching him, but his own ugly grey blade hacked a notch from Ser Vardis' shoulder plate. The brief flurry of fighting ended as swiftly as it had begun, when Bronn sidestepped and slid behind the statue of the weeping woman. Ser Vardis lunged at where he had been, striking a spark off the pale marble of Alyssa's thigh.
"They're not fighting good, mother,"
the Lord of the Eyrie complained.
"I want them to fight."
"They will, sweet baby," his mother soothed him. "The sellsword can't run all day." Some of the lords on Lysa's terrace were making wry jests as they refilled their wine cups, but across the garden, Tyrion Lannister's mismatched eyes watched the champions dance as if there were nothing else in the world. Bronn came out from behind the statue hard and fast, still moving left, aiming a two-handed cut at the knight's unshielded right side. Ser Vardis blocked, but clumsily, and the sellsword's blade flashed upward at his head. Metal rang and the falcon's wing collapsed with a crunch. Ser Vardis took a half-step back to brace himself, raised his shield. Oak chips flew as Bronn's sword hacked at the wooden wall. The sellsword stepped left again, away from the shield, and caught Ser Vardis across the stomach, the razor edge of his blade leaving a bright gash when it bit into the knight's plate. Ser Vardis drove forward off his back foot, his own silver blade descending in a savage arc. Bronn slammed it aside and danced away. The knight crashed into the weeping woman, rocking her on her plinth. Staggered, he stepped backward, his head turning this way and that as he searched for his foe. The slit visor of his helm narrowed his vision. "Behind you, sir!" Lord Hunter shouted, too late. Bronn brought his sword down with both hands, catching Ser Vardis in the elbow of his sword arm. The thin lobstered metal that protected the joint crunched. The knight grunted, turning, wrenching his weapon up. This time Bronn stood his ground. The swords flew at each other, and their steel song filled the garden and rang off the white towers of the Eyrie. "Ser Vardis is hurt," Sir Roderick said, his voice grave. Catelyn did not need to be told. She had eyes. She could see the bright finger of blood running along the knight's forearm, the wetness inside the elbow joint. Every parry was a little slow and a little lower than the one before. Ser Vardis turned his side to his foe, trying to use his shield to block instead, but Bronn slid around him, quick as a cat. The sellsword seemed to be getting stronger. His cuts were leaving their marks now. Deep, shiny gashes gleamed all over the knight's armor, on his right thigh, his beaked visor, crossing on his breastplate, a long one along the front of his gorget. The moon and falcon rondel over Ser Vardis' right arm was sheared clean in half, hanging by its strap. They could hear his labored breath, rattling through the air holes in his visor. Blind with arrogance as they were, even the knights and lords of the Vale could see what was happening below them, yet her sister could not.
"Enough, Ser Vardis," Lady Lysa called down. "Finish him now, my baby's growing tired."
And it must be said of Ser Vardis Egan that he was true to his lady's command, even to the last. One moment he was reeling backward, half crouched behind a scared shield. The next he charged. The sudden bull rush caught Bronn off balance. Ser Vardis crashed into him and slammed the lip of his shield into the sellsword's face. Almost, Bronn lost his feet. He staggered back, tripped over a rock, and caught hold of the weeping woman to keep his balance. Throwing aside his shield, Ser Vardis lurched after him, using both hands to raise his sword. His right arm was blood from elbow to fingers now, yet his last desperate blow would have opened Bronn from neck to navel, if the sellsword had stood to receive it. But Bronn jerked back. Jon Arryn's beautiful engraved silver sword glanced off the marble elbow of the weeping woman, and snapped clean a third of the way up the blade. Bronn put his shoulder into the statue's back. The weathered likeness of Alyssa Arryn tottered and fell with a great crash, and Ser Vardis Egan went down beneath her. Bronn was on him in a heartbeat, kicking what was left of his shattered rondel aside to expose the weak spot between arm and breastplate. Ser Vardis was lying on his side, pinned beneath the broken torso of the weeping woman. Catelyn heard the knight groan as the sellsword lifted his blade with both hands, and drove it down and in with all his weight behind it, under the arm and through the ribs. Ser Vardis Egan shuddered and lay still. Silence hung over the Eyrie. Bronn yanked off his half-helm and let it fall to the grass. His lip was smashed and bloody where the shield had caught him, and his coal-black hair was soaked with sweat. He spit out a broken tooth.
"Is it over, Mother?"
the Lord of the Eyrie asked. "No," Catelyn wanted to tell him. "It's only now beginning."
"Yes,"
Lysa said glumly, her voice as cold and dead as the captain of her guard.
"Can I make the little man fly now?"
Across the garden, Tyrion Lannister got to his feet. "Not this little man," he said. "This little man is going down in the turnip hoist, thank you very much."
"You presume,"
Lysa began. "I presume that House Arryn remembers its own words," the imp said. "As high as honor."
You promised I could make him fly!
The Lord of the Eyrie screamed at his mother. He began to shake. Lady Lisa's face was flushed with fury.
The gods have seen fit to proclaim him innocent, child. We have no choice but to free him.
She lifted her voice.
Guards, take my Lord of Lannister and his creature here out of my sight. Escort them to the Bloody Gate and set them free. See that they have horses and supplies sufficient to reach the Trident, and make certain all their goods and weapons are returned to them. They shall need them on the high road.
The high road, Tyrion Lannister said. Lisa allowed herself a faint, satisfied smile. It was another sort of death sentence, Catelyn realized. Tyrion Lannister must know that as well, yet the dwarf favoured Lady Arryn with a mocking bow. "As you command, my lady," he said. "I believe we know the way."